Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live stream. This is a weekly live stream we do every week to cover things related to digital transformation. And today we are covering the topic of how to choose the best ERP systems for your organization. And more specifically, we're going to talk about specific ERP solutions in the space and really try and get feedback and input from all of you on our weekly or on our annual digital transformation rankings that we publish each year. So thank you for being part of our conversation here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including software selection and implementation of different ERP systems. So we work with all kinds of different ERP systems. And you may be familiar with the annual rankings we publish each year. It's a top 10 ranking. We try to be as objective as possible. However, we also recognize there's a lot of subjectivity that goes into these rankings. So today's conversation and today's guest, I guess, if you will, is really you all, and really want to get feedback for the first time. We've never done this before. We've never gotten feedback from the broader digital transformation community. So we'd love to hear your feedback on some of the different ERP systems in the marketplace. We're going to talk about specific ERP systems. We're going to talk about the strengths and the weaknesses of these different systems. And again, I want to get your feedback on what you think of some of the different systems in the marketplace here today. This podcast, or actually this conversation, is going to become part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast, which is a podcast we publish weekly. Every Wednesday, we put out new episodes. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to see all the final episodes that we put out. But this is a live recording. We're going to take this live recording and edit it, add some content to it, make it part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast that comes out 3 weeks from tomorrow. So in late July, you'll see that the episode come out. So thank you for being part of the live production here today. Lastly, before I really jump into this here today, I wanted to, if you could, just chime in and let me know what city and country you're joining from today. We're going to be taking chat from all of you, or taking comments and questions from all of you. So I'd love to hear not only your questions as we go through the conversation here today, and not only your feedback as we go through the conversation, but as we get started here, I'd love to see what city and country you're all joining from. So if you don't mind dropping in the chat wherever you're joining from today, whichever platform you're listening or watching here today, whether it's YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter, be sure to drop in the chat what city and country you're joining from, if you don't mind. It's always good to see where the global community is joining from today. And this conversation is a very global conversation because we want to gather feedback from you depending on what part of the world you're in. You might have different perspectives on what system or systems are most prominent there within your part of the world. So thanks in advance for chiming in on where you're joining from today. And that's really the setup or the backdrop of today's conversation, choosing the top ERP system. So we want to dive into different ERP systems. We want to be as objective as possible. I fully recognize that we might have some people that chime in with comments that have worked with multiple systems. We might have some of you that sell certain systems. You might have a sort of a bias towards certain technologies, but would love to hear your feedback regardless, whatever your role is, whether you're someone who's implementing these different systems, whether you're a consultant or a sales rep, someone who's evaluated different systems. Would love to hear your perspectives here today. So choosing the top ERP systems, we want to just jump right in and just to set some context here for today's conversation. You know, we're doing these rankings, when we're doing these top 10 rankings of different top ERP systems in the market, there's so many different variables, as you can imagine, in terms of how you would evaluate a system. You could base it largely on functional capabilities. You know, what can the software do? Does it fit what it is you need as a business? Does it fit your industry? Are the capabilities mature? There's a lot of sort of sub dimensions within that, but functional capabilities or functionality in general is oftentimes where organizations hone in their software evaluation efforts. So that's one criteria is functionality. Another capability or another evaluation criteria that's oftentimes used is going to be what kind of ecosystem supports that product. So in other words, are we able to find good resellers, good implementation partners, good consultants, good technologists that really know the software, have experience with the software? Do we have representation for that software vendor in our part of the world? Those are the types of questions that we often ask. You might have a great product that on paper fits all your features and functionality needs, But if there's no ecosystem locally to support the implementation or to provide the resources you need to be successful in your implementation, that sort of waters down or dilutes the capabilities of the software, or the advantages that the software itself might have. So you also have to look at the ecosystem. What kind of support is available for the product in terms of the implementation, post-implementation, ongoing support, et cetera. Another thing that is becoming more important over time, and it wasn't as important, I'd say 10 years ago, but I think it's becoming more important as you evaluate potential ERP systems and you look at what are some of the best ERP systems in the marketplace, is this sort of evolution of ERP systems becoming strictly an application or a set of applications and becoming more of a platform. So in other words, giving us a platform to develop and create new features and functionalities that might be unique to us, or taking advantage of third-party um, software providers that have developed certain capabilities or certain applications on that platform. So in other words, we're looking not just at the software itself, the application itself, but we're also looking at the platform that it enables. What kind of platform does it open up for us? Does it give us additional tools and capabilities to continue to grow and evolve as a company? Does it give us access to third-party apps, third-party developers, third-party software providers that have provided different apps or different capabilities on that same platform? That's another feature or function that, or a evaluation criteria, if you will, that we'll often look at. So those are probably the biggest three, and then you start to get into other things. Of course, cost is always a factor. So we want to know how much does the software cost, not only for the subscription fees or the licenses themselves, but also the implementation too. When we go to implement it, when we go to implement the software, how much is it going to cost us? And we really have to look at it from a total cost of ownership perspective. And then there's also some other intangible sorts of evaluation criteria too. There's things like what kind of user interface does it have? Is it going to be easy for our people to learn? How flexible is the product? How complex is the product? Is it overly complex for our organization, or is it not complex enough for our organization, depending on who we are? So when you look at all these different criteria, you can see how it can become overwhelming to evaluate different ERP systems in the marketplace. And that's part of why when we put these top 10 rankings out every year, there's always a lot of conversation behind it. There's always a lot of people that agree with whoever's at the top or toward the top of the list, and there's a lot of people that disagree. And what's really interesting about these conversations, and I love doing these top 10 lists, even though they're largely subjective, and I can make an argument for or against any top 10 list we put out, just because there's so many different factors you have to consider. But one of the most fascinating things about it is it stimulates a lot of conversation. No matter who's number one or who's not number one, it always stimulates conversation. There's a lot of discussion around, why is that vendor number one? Why isn't someone else number one? What are some of the situations where it might be a different top 10 list? And that's really the way you have to look at these. Is top 10 lists are great to just give you sort of a top level, high level comparison of different ERP systems, but it's not something that you want to use as sort of your end all be all. Just like you don't want to use the Gartner's Magic Quadrant as the sole or the primary decision point, because those are so subjective and there's so many variables that are probably unique to you as an organization that might give you a different outcome or a different evaluation of different systems in the market. So that's sort of the backdrop of the importance of top 10 lists, some of the weaknesses of the top 10 list, as well as how you might consider comparing different ERP systems. And I'd love to hear from the audience. When you look at I'll ask you to be as objective as possible. I know some of you might have trouble being objective because you might just know one part of the world or one system that you're part of that ecosystem. But when you think objectively about the different systems in the marketplace, the different technologies out there, I'd love to hear your feedback on what most excites you. What software vendors do you think are making the biggest advances in terms of some of the things I talked about? Of course, we haven't even talked about AI yet, and specific capabilities like AI, predictive analytics, and things of that nature. But I'd love to hear your feedback on just kind of what's your general state of the union or your general assessment of different systems that are out there in the marketplace right now. Are there any certain software vendors that you're particularly excited about, or you think you have a particularly strong strategy, strong product offering, or something else that makes them worthy of being in our top 10 list? I'd love to hear your feedback below. And I'm watching the stream here across all the platforms for anyone that comments here. And speaking of comments, I appreciate everyone who commented on where they're joining from today. We have Ashish joining from Tampa. Thanks for being here today. Gachuhi from Kenya. I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. I probably did, but I hope I did not. We have Matt from Austin, Texas, Craig from Hereford, UK, John from Bremen, Germany. Thanks for being here today. We've got Shankar from Atlanta. Thank you all for being here today and chiming in where you're joining from today. Truly global community. Really appreciate having you all here. So here's a first comment that I'll pull up here from Ashish on LinkedIn. Ashish says factors such as vendor lock-in, licensing complexity, user groups and forums that support and share implementation woes. That's a really good point and something I did not mention. When we're evaluating potential ERP systems, we have to not only look at the features and functions and capabilities, the general ecosystem that I talked about, price, risk, complexity, et cetera. All that stuff I mentioned before. That's all good stuff. But Ashish mentioned some really good factors, some additional factors you want to consider too. Are you locked into one vendor? Is the licensing overly complex? Is it something that's going to create escalating costs and risk for you in the future? That's something we really have to think about, because a lot of cloud providers are good at getting you sort of locked in or getting your foot in the door with them. But then over time, there's a lot of escalation clauses and things that can kick in that'll cause your costs and your risk to go up over time. And then Ashish also mentioned user groups and forums that support and share implementation woes. So, do you have access to user groups? Are there different support mechanisms to support you not only during your implementation, but post implementation as an ongoing long-term user of the product? Are you going to have the support you need? So that's something that's very important to keep an eye on. I want to get into a couple other comments here before we chime in and start talking about specific vendors, but this is from Dan on YouTube. Dan says, don't you think it'd be more useful to compare the top 10 for each vertical industry, like automotive, for instance? And yes, that is a follow-up that we do. Typically, we publish our top 10 list that's sort of a generic ranking across industries, across geographies, across different company sizes, which is very difficult to do because there is no quote unquote average company that is just industry agnostic. Every company has its own industry needs and specific things that it focuses on. But generally, we start by publishing the top 10 that's sort of across the board general ranking, and then we will follow up that top 10 ranking with top 10 for specific industry verticals. And then we'll also do it based on company size and things of that nature. So different situational top 10 rankings too. But even then, to Dan, to your point, if we were to pull up, say, a top 10 ranking for automotive, even within automotive, now you get into a lot of nuances and differing factors that are going to differentiate different companies that have different priorities and different needs, different strategies, which for any given individual company is going to result in a different top 10 list potentially. So that's why you have to take these top 10 lists with a grain of salt, even if they are specific to your industry. It can be a good starting point. It could be a good data point or a good input to maybe narrow down to a short list or even a long list of potential software solutions. But you don't want that to be the end all be all evaluation approach that you take. So you want to make sure that you look beyond that. So, but I think you do have a good point here that, looking at industry capabilities, industry features is also very important as well. Some other hellos, and thank you for chiming in where you're joining from today. Gary on LinkedIn is joining from Victor, New York. Sandra from Chicago, Illinois. Hillary is joining on LinkedIn from Washington, D.C., which coincidentally is where I am filming here today. I'm traveling for work here in Washington, D.C. Jonathan's joining from New Jersey. Thanks for being here today. And I appreciate everyone being here. I'm just going to jump into the audience comments and questions here. This is from Ashish on LinkedIn. He says, I'm a bit biased SAP since the last 22 years. He's been drinking the SAP Kool-Aid. So at least you acknowledge it. You're drinking the Kool-Aid. I drank the Kool-Aid for SAP early in my career when I was an SAP consultant. So I understand where you're coming from. I didn't do it for 22 years, but I did it for long enough to know that I was drinking the Kool-Aid. So thanks for being here, Ashish. I'd love to hear your feedback on S4HANA and some of the path forward. We're actually going to talk about S4HANA here in just a moment. Here's an interesting comment from Gary on LinkedIn. He says, my clients are smaller manufacturers. Your comment regarding complexity rings true. So, looking at really who you are as an organization and also where you're headed, what do you want to be? What are you trying to become in the next 3 to 5 to 10 years? That largely influences the type of ERP systems you're going to want to consider. On one hand, if you're a small or mid-sized organization, whether you're in manufacturing or any other industry, you want to make sure you have a system, or you choose a system and implement a system that fits your needs today, but also something you can grow into and supports your needs in the longer term and really allows you to scale as an organization. Those are some of the things you've got to factor in as well. This is why a lot of times organizations that are mid-market companies, a lot of times they struggle with, do we go with something like an SAP S/4HANA or Oracle Fusion, knowing that those are big, complex tier one systems that we could definitely grow into. We can become a multi-billion dollar or multinational organization and probably fit pretty well within those two products, but it might be overly complex for who we are today and who we're going to be for the next few years. And so you have that trade-off you've got to make, or you've got to figure out and navigate. Do we go ahead and just make that leap now to something complex like an S/4HANA or Oracle Fusion? Or do we stick with maybe a larger, more robust tier two provider like an Infor or an Epicor? Even looking at different platforms like Salesforce or NetSuite has its own platform too, that with third-party development on top of it, that could provide certain capabilities that you need. So there's sort of like you've got your current state where you are today. What's going to be a good fit today might be something that's a little bit different in terms of where you're headed in the future. If you're a high growth company doing a lot of acquisitions, you've got a lot of private equity money behind you, there's a different mindset and a different type of system you're probably going to be looking at than if you're more of a steady growth, more mature organization that's been around for longer. Maybe you just have slower, steadier growth and you don't have grand ambitions to scale quickly. Then you might have a different short list. You might have a different top 10 list that fits better for you. So those are some of the things that you've got to figure out here too. Dan also mentions on YouTube that when you're evaluating different ERP systems, another dimension to look at is revenue, number of employees, number of sites, and international footprint of the customers. Great point, especially if you are an international organization. You want to see that there's other organizations out there like you using the product, and you also want to know how big the vendor is and how capable the vendor is of supporting your needs, not only the vendor directly, but as I think it was Ashish or someone mentioned earlier, you also want to look at that overall ecosystem, the user groups, the implementation, technical consultants that are available in your region or your part of the world, that sort of thing. Comment here from Hillary on LinkedIn. Hillary says, my clients are government and my clients are government. Profits, we bring them different solutions as far as top players in this space. I'm not sure what I think I'm misunderstanding the question here, but I think the point here is that in government or any other industry vertical, you're going to have different players that you consider, different products that you're going to look at. In the government space, when we do software evaluations, we look at a very different subset of ERP systems compared to a manufacturing organization, whatever the case may be. So thank you for your comment there, your feedback, Hillary. Hello, Jaisri from Toronto. Dan is in DC. That's right. I forgot you're from the DC area. Hillary also love to hear the best ERPs for finance and insurance companies. We'll try to cover that here as we get through the conversation. Sounds like Gary is in Montana. Thanks for joining here today. And then Ardven Sommeren from the Dutch area. What are the Dutch areas? Says a bit late for the center of the Dutch high tech industry. Well, thanks for being here today, late in the day, your time here today. So appreciate all the comments we're getting so far. This is great stuff. Really appreciate it. And I hope you keep the comments coming. I wanted to sort of chime in now or jump in a little bit and talk about specific solutions in the market and sort of get your feedback. And I'll share, some of my real high level observations about these different systems. Again, as I'm going through this, keep in mind, we are not affiliated with any software vendor we're talking about here today, nor are we affiliated with any of the software vendors we're not going to mention here today. So this is just us being independent, tech agnostic advisors to companies. Want to share what we think as far as pros and cons of these different systems, but also more importantly, I want to hear your feedback on what you think. You might agree with some of the stuff I say, you might disagree, you might have some completely different observations you want to throw in. So I really love to hear your feedback here today. And I want to start with SAP. So we were talking about SAP just a moment ago. SAP's S/4HANA is sort of their flagship product that they are that they've been promoting for several years now, close to a decade now. S/4HANA has been sort of the flagship SAP product. They have a large subset of their customer base, their legacy customer base, that are still using ECC or R3 that have not yet made the transition to S/4HANA. S/4HANA brings a whole new architecture and platform compared to legacy SAP systems. The HANA sort of real-time database platform that they've built HANA on, or S/4HANA on that HANA platform, has been sort of a real change in strategy for SAP. So part of it was to provide faster performance for their databases, and especially when you get into analytics, and now with AI, this can be a really big deal. But just getting fast access to data, and also HANA's, or SAP's, building of S/4HANA on the HANA platform also reduced or eliminated SAP's dependency on Oracle to provide Oracle databases, which in the past SAP had relied on Oracle technology as some of the underlying database technology. As you probably can imagine, SAP and Oracle are fierce competitors in the ERP space, but they were also supplier and customer, on the back end technology up until now. So with SAP HANA, with that platform, they've sort of mitigated that risk, if you will, or that dependency on Oracle for its database technology. So those are a couple things, or a couple advantages, I suppose you could say, that HANA brings to the table. Just like any past SAP products, though, S/4HANA is very complex. It's very broad. It's very robust. You can do a lot of stuff, which is great if you're a diversified multinational organization. But where it gets tricky is if you are a mid-sized organization, there's going to be cases where it might be too much for you. It's too much complexity, too much risk, too much cost. But if you're trying to scale for growth, you want to become that multi-billion-dollar multinational organization in the coming years, S/4HANA could be a great platform to help you get there. So I'd love to hear feedback from the audience here. If you've used SAP before, if you're in the SAP community, would love to hear your feedback here on what your thoughts are on S/4HANA. One thing I'll mention is we've seen some clients, and this is becoming less true over time, but it's still true to some degree. But we're seeing some clients that still struggle with some of the capabilities that they were accustomed to in ECC, the legacy SAP product, that has not yet made it over to the S/4HANA platform. In other words, they haven't transitioned every single nook and cranny and feature and function of ECC, has not yet made that migration over to S/4HANA, especially when you get into some more complex manufacturing processes or advanced planning, things of that nature. There just simply isn't that maturity and that established functionality that ECC had for decades, which is understandable. S/4HANA hasn't even been a full decade yet. They're coming up on a decade, but it hasn't been a full decade, whereas ECC had been around for multiple decades, a lot of R&D dollars, a lot of time to build those capabilities. So those are some things to consider. There's also the issue of SAP's mandate, or its sunset date, for legacy customers to move off of ECC. That's creating a lot of anxiety and fear and doubt in the SAP community. And it's also putting a strain on SAP consultants and implementation technology providers, to where there's a spike in demand that is difficult for a lot of organizations to satisfy or to keep up with. So those are some of the things we've got to consider as well. Is it the right time for us to make that jump? And is our implementation plan realistic in that nature, based on availability of resources and whatnot? So those are some of the strengths and weaknesses of SAP. Again, I started my career as a certified SAP consultant. For the first 3 years of my career, all I did was SAP stuff. And this is back, R3, which is the major platform before ECC, back in the late 90s. So this is a long time ago, but I sort of grew up in the SAP space, for better, for worse. And, I think actually my understanding of SAP has sort of shaped my opinion of the ERP space in general. But there's some different pros and cons to SAP and the S/4HANA product. So love to hear your feedback on it. S/4HANA, what do you think the future of S/4HANA is? Where do you see it fitting best in the industry? And while I'm waiting for you to answer that question here today, I want to get to another comment here from Ashish. Ashish on LinkedIn says, we also evaluate the interoperability, especially for integrations, API support, ecosystem partnerships, and install base across a wide range of hyperscalers for cloud implementations, having to follow the roadmap and maturity model. So great point. Back when I was talking about the platform, looking at your ERP system, not just as an application, but giving you a platform to do integration, to look at third-party application providers and maybe have built some sort of app or capability on that specific platform that gives you sort of the best of both worlds, really, if you think about it. And what you're alluding to here, Ashish, is that that combination of the best of both worlds, which is getting an off-the-shelf system that's established and proven, but also having the flexibility of a platform that opens up additional providers and additional things that you can build yourself. If you do want to do a custom app and you want to do it on, an SAP platform or a NetSuite platform, whatever it is, knowing that you've got that platform and you've got the tools to be able to do that is extremely powerful. And that can provide a lot of flexibility, a lot of options for organizations going forward. The one thing I will say, though, is sometimes when you get into these platforms and these interoperability based solutions, sometimes it can get overwhelming. It opens up so many options that it provides almost too much flexibility, too many options. And a lot of organizations find that overwhelming, or they find that actually plays to their strengths, or I'm sorry, to their weaknesses as an organization. And just to give you an example, if you're an organization that's highly decentralized, you've grown a lot through acquisition, or you're a multinational, but you're very decentralized and you have independent ways of operating throughout the world, and you're trying to move to a model now to where you have more of a consistent operating model and you've got more standardized processes and operation models and things of that nature. Actually having that interoperable, flexible solution can fuel the weakness that you're trying to move away from. And that's why a lot of times organizations in that mode will say, well, we want to go with an SAP S/4HANA because for better or for worse, it's a little bit less flexible and it gives us a certain amount of standardization and rigidity. And I don't mean rigidity in a bad way necessarily, but some organizations want that. They want their ERP system to bring the structure, the consistency, the rigidity, whatever you want to call it. And that's why they go that direction. Now, what you have to recognize is that has a different set of risks. If we go, for example, if we move away from a real flexible, interoperable sort of solution, and let's use Microsoft Dynamics as an example here, and I'll come back to Dynamics 365 here in a second. But let's just talk about D365. D365 is a very flexible solution, and it's got a lot of good integration tools, a lot of the interoperability that Ashish is mentioning, a lot of flexibility if you want to custom code anything or change anything with the software. All stuff that you might consider as a strength. But if you're an organization that's already struggling with inconsistent operations and you have too many disparate ways of operating, implementing something like a Microsoft D365 might fit that culture, but it might actually prevent you from accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish, which is to become more standardized, if that is indeed what you're trying to do. So that's why some organizations will say, well, we don't want a Microsoft D365 because that just fuels some of that flexibility or that inconsistency that we're trying to move away from. Let's go with more of an S/4HANA model to where it's more structured, more standardized, gives us a little bit more consistency as an organization. So, that's one of those intangible strategic things you've got to consider. And you also have to recognize if you do go that latter route where you're that decentralized, inconsistent company that's trying to become more scalable, more standardized, that's great. S/4HANA might help you get there, but now you've got to recognize that that's going to introduce a bunch of culture shock to your organization, which is a whole nother set of risks that you've got to manage that has nothing to do with the technology, really. It has more to do with the organization and how you're going to navigate that. So that's just some of the ways you want to think through the whole evaluation process, not only to get to a decision on is SAP the right answer, or is it Microsoft, or is it some other solution. You also want to not only get to that answer of what the right technology is, but you also want to understand what's our implementation strategy and what's our overall rollout strategy based on what it is we're implementing. And if we're implementing S/4HANA, we might have to invest more in change management because it's probably going to be more of a culture shock and it's more of a change for us. And we have to spend more time reconciling broken business processes or inconsistent business processes. Not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that, but you just have to make sure you factor that into your overall plan and that you've budgeted for it and you've got a realistic time frame that reflects all that. So those are some of the considerations that get well beyond just choosing technology per se, but also choosing technology and choosing a rollout, a transformation strategy that's going to help you get there. Just some additional feedback here as it relates to S/4HANA before I move on to other software vendors. This is from Hillary on LinkedIn. Hillary says, I work for a Fortune 100 on ECC, which is an SAP product, a legacy SAP product. I work for a Fortune 100 on SAP ECC, and I agree the strategy to upgrade to S4 was very iterative, but the SAP Treasury model I upgraded went very smoothly. So that's great to hear. That's good. It's always good to hear a good success story, especially when it involves a big product like SAP and when it involves a big Fortune 100 company. Anytime you say that you've been successful in that environment, I'd say, there's probably a lot of good stuff we can learn from that because so many large, complex organizations do struggle with their implementations, not just for SAP, but for any technology, given the complexity of the business. So that's great feedback. Let's see if I can show this entire comment here. I'll have to show part of it and read the rest of it to you. But this is from Ard on LinkedIn. Ard says, we do see customers using these big ERP platforms. Most of the time, these are the OEMs and indeed multi-everything companies. With ASML as an example, they do have a big impact on the supply chain, high-tech companies in the first tier and below. This has also an impact on the interoperability, overarching the digitalization of the supply chain instead of those individual companies. So thank you for your feedback there, Ard. This comment here, let me get to another point here from Carmen on LinkedIn. Hello, Carmen. Good to see you. I think she's in Chicago as well. Someone else was in Chicago that commented. I believe Carmen is based there as well. Carmen says, right on point, something to consider is how you're pushing out your content and housing your data when considering your platform. So really good point. And this is a great example of this sort of the sorts of evaluation criteria you need to look at that fall outside the realm of your normal sort of let's look at the features and functions of the software. But what Carmen's alluding to here is something even deeper in looking at, how is data structured and how are you going to get data from your legacy systems to your new ERP system. Those are all things that need to be carefully considered as well. So thank you for your feedback there, Carmen. Another comment from Ard is that no need to explain. I guess the SMBs in the lower tiers are a lot smaller with less resources. Risks to high for move to these bigger platforms, at least here in the Netherlands. So thank you for joining from the Netherlands. I'll actually be in the Netherlands. You're part of the world next week. So good to have you here in the meantime. Here's a comment from Hillary again on LinkedIn. Says, I'm implementing a client on Sage Intact ERP, which is not highly customizable. In hindsight, Microsoft D365 would have been a better choice for their customized needs. So great point. You do want to look at your ability to customize if you need to, and Microsoft tends to provide a good tool set to customize, to integrate with other third-party systems and whatnot. I'm not saying Sage Intact is bad at it, but Microsoft generally has more functionality, more features, more open architecture, more of a lot of things that a mid-size or even a larger organization might be looking for. Whereas Sage Intact is generally more of a smaller ERP system that's for smaller organizations when you compare it to Microsoft D365. In fact, let's shift gears, and I want to actually talk about D365 here. And by the way, while I'm pulling this up, I also want to invite you to download our 2024 ERP report. It's a digital transformation in ERP report that we published several months ago. And this is the report that we're going to publish again this fall that will feature the top 10 rankings that we have. And so again, appreciate all the feedback and the great comments that you're all providing here today. If you scan the QR code right here on your screen, top right of or top left of your screen, I'll also include a link to this in the description below wherever you're listening or watching. But if you scan that QR code, that'll get you access to our 2024 ERP report, which includes our top 10 ranking for this year. So you can use that as sort of a reference point while we're talking here today, or as a takeaway to kind of see how we ranked different systems last year coming into this year. We're going to do the same thing going into 2025 as well. So again, love to hear your feedback. If you get a chance to scan that and read it, or just sort of scan through it while we're talking here today, I'd love to hear your feedback and what you might change as it relates to that ranking, because obviously every year the ranking does change, and I'd love to hear your feedback there. So let's get to Microsoft D365. This is a product that we've talked a little bit about. I've talked about S/4HANA in a bit of details, but let's talk about Microsoft D365, largely because it's so different than SAP when you compare it to S/4HANA. S/4HANA, as I mentioned, is really good for multinational companies, especially multinational companies that are trying to standardize their operations and become sort of a more consistent operating model and set of business processes. Whereas Microsoft can enable that, but it also gives you flexibility that could be good or bad depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. And just to clarify, when I talk about Microsoft D365 for now or for this conversation, I'm talking about finance and operations. So I guess that's worth noting. Microsoft D365 actually has two two different solutions. You have finance and operations, which is more for larger enterprises, more complex organizations. There's a lot more features and functions within D365 F&O. And that's generally, the types of companies that are considering S/4HANA might also consider D365 finance and operations. D365 could also mean Business Central, which is it's sort of the small and mid-market SaaS solution. And that Business Central is more like an Oracle NetSuite, I'd say. It's more likely to compete with Oracle NetSuite, which I'm going to come back to them in here in a moment. They're more likely to compete with Oracle NetSuite, less likely to compete with or be considered by the same customers as SAP S/4HANA or even Oracle Fusion. So just to clarify that, but Microsoft D365 has flexibility. It's got the Microsoft look and feel. It's got the integration to Office D365. Like I said, a lot of good flexibility and integration capabilities. It's a good platform. They have a pretty unique model, and they have all the pretty large network of ISVs, they call them, independent software vendors, where they've taken the D365 product and they've done something to it to tailor it for a certain industry or a certain function, or provide some sort of features and functions that the core D365 product doesn't have. So that whole ISV model, that whole third-party provider model can be really powerful. And I know it's top of mind because Hillary on LinkedIn was just talking about government. And in government, for example, you have Tyler Technologies that had built their solution that's specific to the government space, but they built that on the Microsoft Dynamics platform. And they're just one example. There's a lot of providers out there that have taken Microsoft D365 and done something to it to make it more suitable for a certain industry. So that kind of opens up a lot of options, a lot of tailored and highly focused options that you may not otherwise get from other software providers. Or if you're going to get it from another software provider, you're going to have to highly customize that software to do the equivalent of what an ISV may have already done with Microsoft D365. So that's something to consider as well. D365 can also be a good option for companies that are sort of in the mid-market now, but they're really scaling up for growth. It could be a good sort of a good alternative to an SAP S/4HANA or Oracle Fusion. One thing I will say, though, probably the biggest thing we see our clients struggle with as it relates to Microsoft D365, there's actually two things that we see our clients struggle with the most. One is that flexibility that I talked about, the strength of the product being flexibility and ease of use and that sort of thing can actually turn on you. If you're trying to standardize, you're trying to get people to change, you're trying to adopt, what the software vendors might refer to as best practices. Those are all things that you might actually work against you if you're a Microsoft customer. And we see clients of ours struggle with that pretty immensely. And the other thing that companies struggle with when they work with Microsoft D365, we found, is the whole ecosystem. I know that was one of the common threads or the common comments I'm seeing in the chat here on the various streams, is that the ecosystem, what kind of support is out there? And there's a lot of options out there in the Microsoft community, I would say. I'd say Microsoft probably has more VARs and more consultants and options available to you on the services side than a lot of ERP providers. But having said that, there's a lot of inconsistency, a lot of discrepancies between the really strong Microsoft providers and the ones that aren't so strong. It's really easy to become a Microsoft partner. I mean, they don't have a lot of controls in place to really weed out the garbage, if you will, in the space. So the good news is you're probably gonna have a lot of options. The bad news is you're gonna have a lot of options that may not be worth considering. So it's harder to narrow down to the implementation partners and options that are most suitable for you. So those are some things you've got to consider as it relates to D365. And here's a comment from Ashish as it relates to D365. She says, yes, Microsoft D365 would have been a consideration as it provides flexibility on the database hosting. Some European countries are restrictive towards hosting European data outside of Europe, say in North America. This is a big issue with S/4HANA's central location. Really good point. That is something you have to consider, is where is the data being hosted, especially if you're moving towards a cloud solution. You want to know, in many cases, you have to know where that data is being housed. And especially as you deal with smaller software vendors where there's less options on where the data is hosted, where the applications are hosted, that can become a bigger problem. I think the good thing with SAP and and Microsoft and Oracle as well, is they're such big software vendors that they have multiple data centers and they have multiple locations where data can be hosted. And in some cases, like S4 HANA and SAP, they're actually working with a number of the hyperscalers like Amazon Web Services and Azure, and different providers that can provide the hosting. So it gives you some flexibility on who hosts the data, where it gets hosted, that sort of thing. So great point, though. Something that you do have to factor in and make sure that you've captured here. There's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, what types of companies are best for D365? Is there a certain industry that leans towards Microsoft D365 more? It's a great question. I'd say, the companies that lean towards D365 in general are going to be companies that value flexibility, companies that are already Microsoft shops. Maybe they're already using Power BI or Power Apps, the Power Platform. Maybe they're using an old legacy Microsoft Dynamics product. Those tend to be the types of companies that stay with Microsoft. But as far as like net new customers that are switching applications or switching providers altogether, the ones most likely to switch to D365 are the ones that are going through a lot of growth. Ones that, a lot of times there's certain functions that Microsoft's pretty good at compared to other systems like project management, for example. They're good at analytics and BI and reporting. So, companies that value that sort of those two capabilities as examples are going to be good fits for D365 potentially. Hillary on LinkedIn talks more about Microsoft D365 by saying Microsoft D365 has continuously come up very affordable from a 5-year cost of ownership perspective. Initial implementation cost is comparable, but their license fees are very affordable. Have you seen that same thing? And yes, I have seen that same thing. The software tends to be a bit less expensive when you compare it to an Oracle Fusion or S4 HANA. The implementation itself can be less expensive because the product isn't quite as complex. But again, they can get more expensive than an S4 HANA or an Oracle in some ways, in some cases, when you get caught in the trap of flexibility and customization. In other words, you start to derail the project because you're so focused on customizing the software or changing the software to fit different parts of how you operate throughout an organization just because you can. And just because you can change the software doesn't mean you should. And that's something you've got to keep in mind, especially with any ERP system, but especially with a product like Microsoft D365 that has that flexibility. So I'd say, yes, Microsoft can be cheaper, but can actually backfire and become more expensive real quickly if you don't manage it well, because it gives you the flexibility and the tools to be more flexible, which can actually add up or escalate your cost over time. Here's a great example of how I love hearing counterpoints and different points of view here. This is from Ard on LinkedIn. Ard says, well, I do not agree on the drawback of flexibility that turns against you. Hence, you still need to have an implementation plan and a digitalization strategy. So choosing a strong partner is paramount. And I actually totally agree with you. I think we're probably saying the same thing in that flexibility can turn against you if you don't have those things in place that you're talking about, Art. So if you don't have a solid implementation plan, a solid digitalization strategy, a really good partner, you don't have the right project governance and controls in place, you don't have the right change management strategy in place to ensure that people aren't resisting the change. If you don't have all those things in place, then yes, you are correct. I'd say I'm correct that you are going to see the flexibility turn against you. But if you do have those things in place, as you mentioned, Ard, then you are correct. Then it shouldn't be a problem that turns against you. But the key is you have to have those things in place. And the problem is most organizations that we work with, their instincts are not to do those things that you just described, which is why they're hiring companies like your company or my company or other consultants out there. Here's a great question from Canada. This is from Harmony on YouTube. Harmony says, hello, Harmony from Canada here. Just started listening. If you're taking questions, when should a business integrate OMS into their ERP? Is ERP supply chain management module unable to scale? And so let me broaden that a little bit and just talk about integration in general. When should you integrate other systems in with ERP? I'd say, the easy answer is as much as you can. As much as you can integrate your back office sort of system of record ERP system with some of your more operational systems that are out there, some of your legacy systems, your regulatory systems. Most organizations are going to have multiple systems out there that they've got to integrate with. So you want to be able to integrate if you can, especially now with more focus on integrated workflows, integrated end-to-end processes, certainly with AI and analytics and things of that nature. You want to make sure that you integrate that data and that you aren't creating silos within multiple systems and silos of data, which is why so many organizations are moving to a new ERP system in the first place, is because they're trying to get away from that model of a very fragmented system, siloed data, et cetera. So I'd say the more you can integrate, the better, just as a general rule of thumb. Here's another comment or question from Mohammed on LinkedIn. Mohammed says, in which step of the digital transformation process do we need to exactly start cleaning up existing data? Is it before implementing or while implementing the D365 solution? And actually, I'll give you the same answer whether you're talking about D365 or any other ERP system. Is the sooner you can start cleaning up the data, the better. Data is very often the critical path, and it's oftentimes the thing that causes delays in projects. So if you can get a head start on that and start cleaning up your data now, start mapping your data to the new system now, and then, obviously by the time you get to testing, you can start volume testing the data. You can start testing data in addition to just testing the functional capabilities of the software. That's just going to put you ahead when it comes time to go live with your new system. So I'd say that's true whether you're talking about Microsoft D365 or any other system. I also want to shift gears now and talk about Oracle Fusion. We have not talked about Oracle Fusion much today, but I do want to talk about it, and we'll get to a couple other software vendors as well. Love to hear your feedback on Oracle Fusion. We don't see as much, just to be candid, we don't see as many clients implementing Oracle Fusion as we do, say, SAP S/4HANA or even Microsoft D365. So I don't know why that is. I don't think it's a reflection of market share. I think it's a bias in our client base for whatever reason. Or here's another hypothesis of why we don't have as many Oracle Fusion clients as we do SAP S/4HANA. We have a lot of S/4HANA clients right now, but there are a lot of troubled S/4HANA clients. So in other words, they've started the implementation, they've started the journey to S/4HANA, and they've run into trouble. In some cases, they failed, and then they hire us to come fix it, to come clean it up. So we are seeing a lot of recovery and remediation in the SAP space. We are not seeing that in Oracle. So that could be part of it. I'm not sure if there's a direct correlation or a science to that, but it's just, it's a factual point of data that may be biased and may be somewhat skewed, but that is something we're seeing. But having said that, I think Oracle Fusion is an interesting product because I feel like if you're looking at the two extremes we were just talking about, we were talking about SAP S/4HANA being sort of the standardized, really highly scalable, structured system. And then you've got Microsoft D365, which is sort of on the other extreme, at least for larger enterprises. And this is going to be more flexible, more of a platform rather than just an application. It's a lot of integration tools. It's pretty open architecture. A lot of very different products. SAP and Microsoft could not be much different in terms of just the architecture, the way the product's built, the types of customers that use them, et cetera. I view Oracle Fusion as sort of like in the middle. I feel like they're sort of like they have elements of both systems. They have some of the flexibility and some of the open architecture that Microsoft brings to the table, but Oracle Fusion also has that sort of standardized model, or a little bit more of a standardized model, somewhat like SAP. I wouldn't say they're as standardized. They're not as rigid. They're not as focused on common processes, common operating model, and all that stuff, but they are more that way than, say, a Microsoft D365. So Oracle Fusion, I view as a product that can actually be a really good balance, or sort of a best of both worlds. If you're an organization that's sort of stuck in two worlds, as I talked about before, you're stuck or torn between what you're doing today versus what you want to be in the future. I feel like Oracle Fusion can be a good way to give you the best of both what you need today, but also something that gives you some scalability to move to the future, especially if you're more flexible now. Maybe you're decentralized, maybe you're a bit, fragmented and inconsistent operationally, but you want to move towards more of a standardized model, a more consistent operating model. You want to start acting like one company. You want to truly scale with these common processes. I feel like Oracle Fusion sort of fits in the middle there. And that sort of rounds out like the big three vendors. You've got, SAP and Oracle SAP and Microsoft on the two extremes. And then you've got Oracle Fusion that's sort of in the middle, I'd say, in that continuum of general features and capabilities and things of that nature. So curious to hear from you all. Do any of you have experience with Oracle Fusion? What's your feedback? What do you see as the future of Oracle there? That would be a great thing to hear from you all here. I think one of the other things to note about Oracle Fusion is that, in addition to some of the things I just mentioned, Oracle Fusion also has a very strong focus on analytics, business intelligence, and anything to do with enterprise performance management, anything to do with numbers. Basically, Oracle Fusion is particularly strong at that. That's historically been a real strong function and capability that they bring to the table. So that's something to keep in mind too, when you're looking at Oracle Fusion. So love to hear your feedback on that as well. Here's a question that's unrelated to Oracle, but I do want to come back to Oracle Fusion here. This is from Fur on YouTube. Fur says, I implement ERP, specifically Odoo. How do I get clients at social media marketing a good choice? Odoo, how to get clients at social media a good choice. So the reason I bring this up is because it's the first time Odoo has come up. Odoo is a open source provider. It's an open source platform that we see a lot of smaller companies that are implementing it. I see Odoo as sort of a good alternative to an Oracle NetSuite or maybe Microsoft Business Central. And then here's maybe a more relevant direct question from Fur on YouTube. What do you think between Odoo versus D365 versus S4HANA versus Oracle Fusion? And what I'd say about Odoo is just it's a totally different solution. I mean, it couldn't, we're adding a whole nother layer here, a whole nother different type of product, which is open source. Odoo is extremely modular. So it's really good if you're sort of like an agile based organization. You just want to implement pieces of technology to get started, and then you want to build on that stack longer term. Odoo can be a great way to take that approach. Odoo also also offers sort of a freemium model, so you can use the product for free, which a lot of customers like, and that's how a lot of customers get started with Odoo. Is they just go get the CRM module or just one module, test it out, try it, they like it, they start to adopt it, they start to use it and see value, and then they start paying. The other thing to think about is Odoo, is a good product, but it does require, I'd say, it on one hand, it allows non-technical people to configure and set up the software. So it's meant to be sort of a low code, no code environment. So it's not meant to be a product that's real heavy from a technical perspective, but it does require a certain amount of maintenance as far as just the setup, and it almost creates more of a do-it-yourself requirement for the implementation, which leads me to another point. Is Odoo is very strong. They're a company based out of Belgium, out of Brussels. So they have a pretty strong presence in the Northern Europe regions, and the rest of Europe as well. They're becoming very prominent in Asia Pacific as well. They're starting to make headway in North America as well. So they are a global company, but you have to look at, in my part of the world, wherever you are, do we have the Odoo resources and the Odoo support that we might need locally within our country? And then you also want to make sure that it, with Odoo, you want to make sure it can handle some of the complexities of your business. If you're a complex manufacturer, or you're highly engineering based, if there's a heavy engineering component to your business, Odoo may not be a good fit. So you just want to really stress test the complexities of your business against what Odoo can or can't do. I will say, of all the systems out there, if I were going to do a top 10 list of the top 10 ERP systems with cult followings and just passionate loyalists, I would absolutely put Odoo number one. I don't know what it is about the Odoo community. I don't know if it's their marketing or the cult-like leadership of the, and when I say cult, I do not mean that in a bad way. But the Fabian, who's the CEO of Odoo, has like a cult-like following. I mean, people just really respect the guy and follow him. And anytime I talk about Odoo or put out an Odoo blog or a video, those perform really well. And I just get there's just a lot of support in the Odoo community. So I don't know how important that is to your evaluation or whether it is important at all, but it's just something that I find super fascinating and interesting, being an independent observer of the space here. So Odoo is another option. We're not getting a lot of comments here yet on Oracle Fusion, but we are getting comments or questions on other types of systems. This is from Civ on YouTube. Civ says, how do you evaluate IFS as a solution? And I actually think IFS is a very strong solution. And that was actually one of the ones I was going to get to here, but I'll get to it now since you brought it up. But IFS is a good solution for asset intensive companies, companies that have a strong need for field service management. So if you think of like construction companies or utility companies, any company that has crews and assets out in the field and or has very capital intensive, in terms of machinery and trucks and fleets and things of that nature. The reason IFS is so good at that, and the reason I bring up those capabilities, is because IFS tends to focus on those heavy industrial, capital intensive sorts of organizations. And they provide real strong capabilities in field service management, which is basically when you've got a crew out in the field. They're not in a manufacturing shop floor, but they're out in a field doing something. They're building something, they're repairing something, they're doing maintenance on a power line, whatever it is. IFS sort of fits that model really well. And they also have an enterprise asset management module or capability that's very strong too. So if you've got, again, heavy equipment and a lot of capital intensive aspects of your business, IFS is really well suited for that. So if you're in utilities, construction, et cetera, I would say, or telco, I would say IFS is something you may want to consider. IFS is one of those systems that's not trying to be everything to everyone, but they are a good option. If they're a good fit, they're probably a great fit, and otherwise they may not be worth looking at. That's okay. Exhibit A of what happens when I talk about Odoo. We're getting a lot of comments on Odoo now that came up. Mohammed on LinkedIn says Odoo is doing great work in Morocco, promoting their brand and services. Fur on YouTube says, I think the open source aspect of Odoo that developers really like. And then also related to Odoo, Vast CNC on YouTube says Odoo is great for customization, accessibility, business logic, is all in Python and fully open source. So it's a great point. Python was a good point. And I'm glad you brought up the fact that it's Python, fully open source. Those are important aspects of Odoo as well. Here's a system we haven't talked about yet, and that is Epicor. So I want to get to Epicor because Epicor is an interesting product. It's one that I've actually been pretty fascinated by for over a decade now. When I started my last company, Panorama Consulting, early on, especially, a lot of the clients were manufacturing types of organizations. And even today at third stage, over half of our revenue, half of our business is coming from manufacturing and distribution. And so Epicor is just a product we see a lot in that space, especially in the mid-market. It's a good alternative to, if you're a manufacturer or a distribution type of company or a retailer, and you're big enough that you need sort of tier one ERP system capabilities, but you don't necessarily want to go with an Oracle Fusion or an S/4HANA from SAP, Epicor could be a great option. They've got a great product that I feel like Epicor has always had a pretty good product, but they've now augmented what I'd say is a good product with more of a cloud-based solution or solutions with a few different products that they offer. And they have multiple products like Profit 21 and et cetera. So there's multiple systems that, Epicor Kinetic is another one. So there's multiple systems that Epicor provides or offers to the space, depending on what vertical you're in. But if you're in manufacturing and distribution, you're mid-size, it's a great product. They've always had a good product, but now I feel like the company as a whole, and just looking at sort of the intangible aspect of the leadership and the direction of the company, I think that's very strong. They have a really strong executive team that they've put in place over the last 5 or 7 years. And I think now, finally, after 10 or 20 years of turmoil in the Epicor space, where if you recall, or if you knew, Epicor was changing hands. The ownership was changing a lot, different private equity firms coming in and out. And it created this sort of instability as a company. Again, good product, but the direction of the company was sort of like a whipsaw effect for a while there. So there was some uncertainty around Epicor's future, I'd say 10 years ago, but in more recent years, they've really solidified their executive team. And I think they have a much clearer strategy now. And they've also invested more heavily in their ecosystem. So they've built out more partners and they've become more partner friendly. Whereas 10 years ago, they were sort of there's a lot of tension between Epicor as the company and some of the Epicor partners, whereas some of that has dissipated now. So I just feel like there's a intangible strategy and leadership and direction that the company has now that they didn't have before. So that, in my opinion, that makes Epicor a very strong option especially if you're a mid-market manufacturing and distribution company. If you do complex manufacturing, make to order or engineer to order, Epicor can be a great fit as well. They've got some really good tools for product configuration and engineering and things of that nature. So Epicor can be a great fit as well. And by the way, with Epicor and in all these different systems we've talked about so far, whether it's Microsoft or SAP, Oracle, Epicor, um, you can find more not only through the ERP report, which you can scan this QR code right here. If you haven't already scanned that code, you can see the ERP report for this year. And in this input I'm getting from you is to help us get some additional input for our 2025 report. But in the meantime, you can check out that that QR code to learn about that. But the reason I bring this up is because you can not only scan that paper or that report to get more info about all these different vendors we're talking about, but if you go to my YouTube channel and just search whatever vendor it is you want to learn more about, whether it's Epicor or Workday, Microsoft, Oracle, SAP, there's tons of videos on my YouTube channel that talk about these different systems and pros and cons, all that good stuff. So be sure to check that out. If you're looking for more of a deep dive into any one of these systems, be sure to check out not only the ERP report with QR code here, but you can also go to the YouTube channel. So that's a little bit about Epicor. Love to hear any feedback from people that have used Epicor. In fact, we've already got one comment here from Ard on LinkedIn. Ard says Epicor is a real manufacturing SMB focused platform, complete and nice integration with MES to integrate with machine data. Their branding in my realm is not very strong. And actually, I think I would agree with you on that. You don't see, I guess when I think branding, I think, for example, Odoo, we were talking about Odoo. Odoo's very good at branding. I mean, their marketing, their everything from like their logo to their color scheme to, I can't go anywhere in the US nowadays without seeing Odoo billboards. I see them at airports. I see them on highways. I'll see billboards. I even took my kids to a professional basketball game a few months ago out of town. It was outside of Denver where I'm based. I forgot where we were, but we're in some other city. And on the court, a big Odoo banner or a big Odoo graphic, was popping up in the middle of the game. So, you look at someone like an Odoo or certainly SAP. SAP's always been really good at branding. Epicor is not there yet. I don't know if they need to be or ever will be, partly because they don't need to be advertising in airports or on billboards because they're very focused. They're going after manufacturing companies in the Midwest, Midwestern US, or rural parts of Europe, or some parts of Asia where there's heavy manufacturing, industrial types of companies. That's just a different market that probably doesn't value golf banners and things like that. Odoo, I know it pops up everywhere. So glad to see it's not just me. One comment here. This is another good question from Dan on YouTube. Dan says, do you feel that there's an easy upgrade path from Epicor Vantage, Epicor 8, 9, and 10, which are really old, and Epicor Kinetic? Have you seen Kinetic and enterprise level deals or just SMBs? Yes, I have seen Kinetic and enterprise level deals, not as many as in the SMB space, but we are seeing Kinetic more now than we would have seen any Epicor product, say 10 years ago at the enterprise level. But I think your other point, the first point or the question you bring up, which is, do you feel there's an easy upgrade path from one of the legacy Epicor products to Epicor Kinetic? It's a great point in that it is largely a re-implementation, that's a true statement for most of the products I'm talking about here today. When we talk about, you talk about Microsoft D365, for example, moving from the old Microsoft Dynamics Great Plains or Navision or Xapta, moving from one of those systems to D365 is essentially a re-implementation. Same with going from SAP ECC to S4HANA. That is largely a re-implementation. Now, there are benefits of staying with that same vendor because it has the same look and feel, and there's some similarities and commonalities, and it's an easier learning curve, but it still is very much it's very much a re-implementation, and that's something that's worth noting as well. I want to get to at least one more vendor here to talk about, and that's Oracle NetSuite. And the reason I want to make sure we get to this one is because Oracle NetSuite is such a common system in the small and mid-market. They rank high in our top 10 list largely because of their market share. I mean, so many small and mid-sized companies are using NetSuite, so much so that I think at times Oracle gets a little bit too far ahead of themselves trying to sell NetSuite in places they maybe shouldn't be selling NetSuite. So I think they're very aggressive in their sales efforts. They've obviously picked up a lot of market share in recent years. What I like about NetSuite, especially now, I wouldn't have necessarily thought this was a big deal 5 or 10 years ago, but especially now with all these other competitors like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft who are still sort of making that transition over to the cloud. NetSuite's they're not sitting back doing nothing, but they've been in the cloud since 1998, and when they started 25 years ago. So everything they've built, all the R&D dollars they put into their product is still relevant here today in 2024 as it was, back in the late 90s and early 2000s when they were starting out. The reason this is a big deal is because then on the flip side, or in contrast, you have, say, SAP or Microsoft, who has all these legacy products with great capabilities, but now they're trying to rewrite that code and recreate that capability for the cloud. And so that's just, that's a lot of, I don't want to say it's wasted R&D, but it's R&D that they have to make now that NetSuite doesn't have to redo. NetSuite can just keep building on their capabilities. They can keep expanding the product and growing and whatever. They're not having to redo stuff for the cloud because they were always in the cloud. So there's a certain amount of maturity and stability that comes with an established cloud solution like a NetSuite, and that's something that's worth noting. It's a great first real ERP system for a lot of small and mid-sized companies that are moving from QuickBooks or Xero or some sort of industry-specific ERP system or a homegrown system. Oracle NetSuite can be a great way to sort of ease into the world of commercial off-the-shelf cloud systems. So those are some things to keep in mind. The downside of Oracle NetSuite, I would say, well, let me finish or add one more strength. One of the strengths that is more recent or more of a recent development for Oracle NetSuite is they have really focused on this whole platform concept, where they've opened up their platform to third-party developers and they've created different apps, and there's different app providers now that can provide different point solutions within the NetSuite platform. So that gives a lot of options for organizations too. If they find that Oracle NetSuite as a base product gets them close, but not all the way to where they need to be, they might find what they need to fill in some of those gaps with third-party apps on the platform. So that's something to keep in mind as well. The downside of Oracle NetSuite is, again, back to a strength also being a weakness. The maturity of their cloud solution, the fact that they're SaaS multi-tenant, means that there's a certain amount of rigidity or lack of flexibility that comes with the product. And now, again, I just said that there's third-party apps, there's a platform that opens up options and gives you a certain amount of flexibility. So they are doing things to counter this challenge. But a lot of companies implementing Oracle NetSuite, especially small companies that aren't used to having a structured system, they struggle culturally and organizationally with that change at times and operationally. So it's just something to be aware of. It's not to say you shouldn't implement Oracle for that reason, but it's something that you just have to recognize as a risk. If you implement Oracle NetSuite in general, you're just going to have more rigidity and there's going to be more change imposed on your organization than you might have if you implemented, say, an Odoo or a Microsoft D365. So those are some of the things you've really got to keep an eye on. So love to hear your feedback on Oracle NetSuite. If you're using it or evaluating it, if you're part of the Oracle NetSuite community, I'd love to hear your feedback on what are the strengths and weaknesses of Oracle NetSuite. And while you're answering that question, I'll get to some additional audience questions here. This is from Fur again on YouTube. Fur says, I live in Mexico and Odoo hit product market fit in Latin America. A lot of clients of mine want it because of certain characteristics of the product, mainly price versus features included. And that's a great point. I will say, though, if I'm going to play devil's advocate with Odoo, you have to be careful in that, yes, they're really good at getting sort of a low cost point as an entry point, but they're also good at escalating the cost of their software over time. So it could be that it looks very enticing early on because it looks so cheap, especially with sort of that freemium model. But over time, if you really look at how they price their software, things can add up quickly over time. But now, on the other side of that, you also have to look at the simplicity. Their pricing model is a bit more simplistic than, say, like an Oracle NetSuite or Oracle Fusion. I'd say Oracle products in general have more complex pricing. It's harder to understand and decipher. And that could be even more risk for a lot of organizations than escalating costs that might be a little bit more transparent in the case of Odoo. So good stuff there. I hope this has provided you some good input and food for thought as you think about different ERP systems. I know there's a lot of systems we didn't get to. We'll probably have to do a part 2 of this conversation because I didn't get to Infor Cloud Suite. That was one I really wanted to get to. I wanted to get to Workday. So those are 2 big ones that we didn't get to, but I do want to at some point in the future. So be sure to keep an eye on our schedule here. Every week we do these live sessions. It becomes part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So be sure to check that out. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And I also want to invite you to an event we're hosting in Denver, Colorado, in beginning of October. You can attend in person in Denver with me there, as well as other people from Third Stage, other people that aren't from Third Stage. We have a great speaker lineup shaping up here. And that is our Digital Stratosphere report, or our Digital Stratosphere event. And I said report because I'm having trouble getting rid of the QR code for the report. Now I just added a new QR code at the top of the screen right here. If you go to this QR code or just go to stratosphere2024.com, you can see the speaker lineup, the way it's shaping up, the agenda, the way it's shaping up. We're continuing to add to it. It's going to look a lot different and a lot more complete and expansive once we're done. But that event is something you may be interested in. You can join in person in Denver, October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. Or if you can't make it to Denver, don't want to come to Denver, you can also join remotely via the internet, wherever in the world you're from. So be sure to check that out. You can check out the pricing options and whatnot. I'll be one of the keynotes. There's a couple dozen speakers there, so be sure to check it out. Great lineup. So if you want to learn more about different ERP systems in the market, learn more about digital transformation, ERP implementation, best practices, and keys to success, all that stuff, check out the agenda for stratosphere2024.com. It's meant to be a tech agnostic conference to help you through your transformation journey. I want to thank you for being here today. Thanks for all the great feedback. We had a lot of awesome comments and questions, so thank you for that. And appreciate everyone joining here today. Hope you have a great week. And then be sure to check out transformationgroundcontrol.com. Every Wednesday, new episodes drop. This conversation, this recording will become part of Transformation Ground Control that gets released in 3 weeks. But in the meantime, you can go watch all the past episodes, keep up with upcoming ones by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. So hope you all have a great week, and we will see you next time on our weekly live podcast.